Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Biola University. And we might even have a few Biola students here. Where are you, Biola students? Thank you very much. I'm scripted because I think people are concerned I might ramble on, so bear with me for a few minutes. I'm going to make some introductory comments. It's so good to have all of you here tonight, and welcome those of you who are live streaming for this wonderful event. This is The Cost of Freedom, How Disagreement Makes Us Civil. There are deep divisions in our society, divisions which we are reconciling and struggling to go through, and there's a contest over what freedom means, who matters most, and who gets to determine. That conflict drives wedges between people, can make our life together more difficult, and how we navigate disagreement and what kind of virtues we cultivate even when we disagree deeply is one of the most pressing questions our society faces. We're very honored tonight for the very first time at a university embracing a Christian tradition to have Dr. Robert George and Dr. Cornel West with us. And they will be more formally introduced in just a minute. And we're also so glad, Pastor Rick Warren, you are here too to facilitate this conversation. So thank you for saying yes. These are three of our nation's leading thinkers. They don't see eye to eye on everything, but they're committed to cultivating conversations about difficult topics that take the quest for truth seriously while respecting differences. This is a quest that's vital for those of us in higher education to support and promote in the broader society. It's what we like to talk about here at Biola, of life with a firm center and soft edges. Biola University's Torrey Honors Institute, which is one of tonight's sponsors, exemplifies this. For 20 years, Torrey's been committed to instilling undergraduate students with a love for truth that comes through dialoguing about great texts and big ideas. Students in our honors program don't always agree with each other. Sometimes they don't always agree with the faculty that they're teaching them. But they learn through their discussions that reasoning together can help them discover unexpected friendships. And that is the beauty of conversing around those issues about which we disagree. Our other sponsor is Biola University's Templeton-funded Center for Christian Thought, designed as a gathering place for scholars from around the world to grapple with the big issues and ideas of the day. This round table, interdisciplinary nature of these conversations encourages this open-mindedness. And I think one of the virtues that the church needs and our nation needs more than ever before is the virtue of listening. Not just listening in order to prepare to respond to somebody else, but listening in order to prepare to learn from somebody else. And this year's Center for Christian Thought theme is intellectual virtue and civil discourse. So it is a Torrey program and the Center for Christian Thought that are examples of the sort of intellectual atmosphere Christian universities must embody, defined not by retreat, not by safety or closed-mindedness, but by curiosity and discourse that sometimes can be a bit uncomfortable. That's why I'm so proud to see Biola hosting this conversation tonight, and forums like this that engage the most difficult questions. And I believe, with all my heart, that we can model a form of cultural engagement that can be instructive to a divisive world. If we, as a Christ-centered university, can balance truth and grace and live with that whole idea of a firm center and soft edges, we can have a great witness. Having convictions and having compassion. It is not either or, it is both and. Jesus came full of grace and full of truth, not half of each. It's the Jesus way. And I believe we need more winsome voices in this world. So the three leaders that we'll hear from tonight in just a few minutes, they each have strong convictions, to be sure. And yet you will see them modeling civility, modeling conviction, modeling compassion, even amidst their disagreements. We have much to learn from them tonight. So I am so excited about this evening. Are you? You guys ready? Great night. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Melissa Schubert of our Torrey Honors Institute, who will introduce our three distinguished guests this evening. Dr. Schubert. so sorry, I took her notes. That would have been really a big problem. That's yours, and that's yours, and this is mine, and thank you.
I'm so happy to join Dr. Corey in welcoming you tonight. We are honored to be hosting all three of our distinguished guests from whom we are eager to learn and to whom we are eager to listen. Their collective accomplishments, were I to spend time listing them all, could keep us from getting to the main event, so forgive me for being brief. Cornel West was the class of 1943 professor of African American Studies at Princeton University before leaving the school in 2011 to become professor of philosophy and Christian practice at the Union Theological Seminary in New York City. He's written 19 books and edited an additional 13. He's best known for his classic Race Matters, Democracy Matters, his memoir, Brother West, Living and Loving Out Loud, and his latest book, Black Prophetic Fire. He appears frequently on the Bill Maher Show, The Colbert Report, CNN, and C-SPAN, and has appeared in over 25 documentaries. West has also appeared in film. He had a part in The Matrix. And he has made 3 spoken word albums, collaborating with artists like Prince, Andre 3000, and more. Cornel West's passion to bear witness to love and justice in a variety of media is nearly unparalleled. Robert P. George is McCormick Professor of Jurisprudence and Director of the James Madison Program in American Ideals and Institutions at Princeton University. He served as a presidential appointee to the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights and as a member of the President's Council on Bioethics. He's the author or co-author of 5 books, including What is Marriage?, Conscience and Its Enemies, and The Clash of Orthodoxies, Law, Religion, and Morality in Crisis. George is a frequent contributor to First Things magazine, for which he's also a member of the editorial advisory board, and he's written widely for the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, National Review, Touchstone, Boston Review, City Journal, and the Times Literary Supplement, to name a few. He's been recognized for his manifold accomplishments with, again to name a few, honorary doctorates of law, letters, ethics, science, civil law, humane letters, and juridical science. Rick Warren is a pastor of Saddleback Church in Lake Forest, California. He founded this church with his wife, Kay, in 1980. And speaking of to name a few, today it averages 30,000 weekly attendees with more than 300 community ministries to groups such as prisoners, folks with addictions, people struggling with mental illnesses, CEOs, single parents, and those with HIV/AIDS. Dr. Warren advises leaders in the public, private, and faith sectors on leadership development, poverty, health, education, faith, and culture. Time magazine named him one of 15 world leaders who mattered most in 2004, and in 2005, one of the 100 most influential people in the world. Warren's a pastor, global strategist, theologian, and philanthropist. Please join me in welcoming our honored guests to the stage.
Well, thank you, first of all, for coming tonight. It says more about you than it does about us, because it says that you're interested in learning. All leaders are learners. And the moment you stop learning, you stop leading. So thank you for being here tonight. You are literally sitting in the presence of genius in these 2 chairs right here. I've had the privilege of lecturing at a lot of universities around the world. I don't know 2 more brilliant men than the 2 men that are sitting right here, George and Cornel West. And I can't wait to hear what they're going to say. And I'm not even worried about being the moderator on this because I'll just wind it up and set it up and they'll spike it. And so we don't have to deal with a whole lot with that. Each of us are going to take a little introductory remarks, and then we're going to start some questions, and then we're going to take actually questions from Twitter. And those will be, if you'd like to send a question in, you can do that. You may not like it, but the future of the world is diversity. And we've got to learn how to get along together. I do not believe in relativism, but I do believe in pluralism. Because the world is different. We're all different. You know, when I started Saddleback Church, I was thinking about that. In the first 2 years of church, it was a lily white, young, urban, professional, yuppie church. Today, Saddleback Church speaks 67 languages.
Wow.
And actually in our values, SADDLEBACK, each letter represents a value, and the A stands for Second Chance Grace Place, but the A stands for All Nation Congregation. And we want our church to look like heaven's going to look. If you don't like getting along with other people, you're not going to like heaven, because they're not all going to look like you and be like you, sound like you, or smell like you. So we got to figure out how to disagree without being disagreeable. You can have unity without uniformity. You can walk hand in hand without seeing eye to eye on every issue. And one of the two things that these two brothers have done is they've modeled civility. Now, let's just admit it. Our society is getting ruder. Would you agree with that? And the internet is provoking this, and the problem with criticism on the internet is everything is permanent, searchable, and global. And anybody can say anything about you, and it's never going away. And you just have to deal with that. So how do you learn to get along with people in a world that are lots of different differences? You know, because I did the prayer at two presidents. One was a Republican and one was a Democrat. I'm often asked, are you left wing or are you right wing? And I always say, I'm for the whole bird. Have you ever seen a bird with one wing? It flies around in a circle. Now, I don't know about you, but it's my opinion that nobody gets it right all the time, especially me. And so sometimes they're right and sometimes they're right, and we've just got to learn from each other. And so over the past 12 years, I was talking to Cornel about this backstage. I've had the opportunity the last 12 years to really learn to work with people who I totally disagree with and who totally disagrees with me around the world. 12 years ago, actually this Saturday, is the 12th anniversary of the peace plan, which Saddleback started. I came up with the idea, the vision, actually sitting on the ground in South Africa 12 years ago. And peace stands for promote reconciliation, equip ethical leaders is the E. A in peace is assist the poor, C is care for the sick, and E is educate the next generation. And I was telling Cornel that I've sent out 24,869 of my members to 197 countries doing the peace plan. When you do that, you have to learn to work with all kinds of people. And there are bridge builders in life and there are wall builders in life. I want to be a bridge builder. And particularly as an evangelist, you know, you can't win your enemies to Christ. You can only win your friends. And before people are going to trust Jesus, they want to know, can I trust you? You know, before anybody ever asks, is the Bible credible? They want to know, are you credible? Can I trust you? And if you're credible, well, then maybe I'll listen to what you have to say. And so tonight, we're going to talk about freedom. We're going to talk about civility. We're going to talk about disagreeing and agreeing and all of those things combined. Now, these two guys, there are a lot of differences between the two, but they're more similar in ways that you imagine. First, they both love the Lord. They both love the Lord. Second, they're both patriots. They're both Americans. And third, they're both brilliant. They both taught at Yale. There are a lot of other things that you've done together. And so while they have different perspectives.
Both pretty good looking.
Oh, stunning. Stunning. You know, I didn't want to. Let's listen to Robbie. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your opening statement?
Thank you, Rick. And I just want to say how blessed Cornel and I are to be here with our dear brother Rick, Pastor Rick, my dear friend, and with the Torrey Honors College and Biola University. I want to thank the president, I want to thank Melissa, and everyone who's been involved in arranging this visit. I was here a little over a year ago, Cornel, and I had a wonderful time. I met with students, I met with faculty, I gave a little lecture, and at the end of it, they said, well, I've got one request, Brother Paul, one request. What's that? Can you come back? I was about to say, I'd be delighted to, and he said, and bring Cornel West. I said, if Cornel West knew what was going on here, he'd be beating the door down to get here. So I invited Cornel to join me in coming out here, and I'm just so grateful to him for agreeing to come along. We've just had a wonderful day. We had a wonderful day meeting with the faculty, a group of faculty members with whom we discussed John Henry Newman's great work, The Idea of a University, a book that's truly prophetic, a book that we should return to at this time, given the condition of so many of our colleges and universities. They may be flourishing in many ways. Many of them are in pretty good shape financially. The place where I teach is in very good shape financially. But are these places in good shape in terms of the mission of the university, the values that they are exemplifying and imparting? Well, that's not so clear. And so we need to return to Newman's ideas about what liberal education means, about the importance of pursuing truth for its own sake. That's what we've got to get back to. And Newman teaches us such important lessons there, and it was just wonderful to enter into discussions with those members of the faculty who were joined with us. And then we went into one of the other buildings, and we met with students to discuss John Stuart Mill's great work on liberty, another prophetic work that it is so important for us to return to today, a work that discusses the importance of freedom of thought and expression, not just as abstractions, as abstract rights. Well, I have the right to say whatever I want, you shouldn't shut me down. Not just as abstractions, but as essential conditions in the enterprise of truth-seeking. We should value freedom of speech, Mill teaches us, not because there is no truth, but rather because there is a truth that needs to be pursued, that we need to pursue, that we need to appropriate. And it's only in conditions of freedom, where the mind is free, where people are free to enter into discussion and dialogue and debate, that we can pursue the truth. So it's been a wonderful day, and we're just so grateful to everyone for coming out to hear us this evening. Now to the evening's business. It's sometimes said the most powerful bond in the human world is the mother-child bond, and I believe that. That's probably true. But I want to call attention this evening to another very powerful bond that is too often overlooked. It's a bond that we need to appreciate in order to make that bond happen in our discourse in pluralistic societies like the United States of America, where people disagree. And I call this the bond of truth-seeking. The bond of truth-seeking. What I have in mind is this. Let's ask ourselves the question, why do we enter into discussion and debate when we do this? Why do we do it? It's a question that goes all the way back to Plato and his depiction of Socrates' interactions with his interlocutors in the Gorgias and in some of his other dialogues. Why do we do it? Do we do it for victory? Do we talk for victory? Do we talk to show off, make a spectacle of ourselves? Do we talk to impress people, like at cocktail parties or maybe in a freshman class or something like that? Why do we enter into dialogue, discussion, debate? Well, the reason that we ought to be doing that is for the sake of the truth. Now, if I'm just trying to defeat you, my interlocutor in a debate, to show how much smarter I am, or to gain publicity for myself, or to show off, or to become a public figure or a celebrity, that's not worth much. In the end, those goals end up, even if you achieve them, being ashes in your mouth. what you should be about with your interlocutor. The whole point of discussion and debate is to arrive at the truth together. And when we understand that as the point, and we understand the value of the truth, that the truth is not merely instrumentally worthwhile because it can be useful for other ends, but truth itself is inherently, intrinsically worthwhile. It inherently enriches and ennobles us. That's why we should be appropriating truth as much as we possibly can. When we recognize that, then we will not see our interlocutor as an enemy to be defeated, but rather, even if we disagree, even if we strongly disagree, as a friend with whom we are engaged in a common project with a common goal. What's that goal? Trying to get to the truth of whatever the matter is under discussion. It may be a profoundly important matter. It may be a matter of justice and human rights on which we disagree. The human condition is such. We are poor, fallible, frail, fallen creatures. We can be wrong even about important things. We can be wrong even when we're trying to be good. Even when we're trying to do the right thing, we can line up on the wrong side. And the only way that we can have a hope of being on the right side is to think as critically and carefully as we can and engage with people who don't see it just the way we do. Listen to their arguments, not in a merely notional sense, but with an open mind. The president was absolutely right about that. That is so critical. And when we're doing that with each other, we are forming that bond of truth-seeking. Yes, the method might be dialectical. It begins from disagreement. We might not reach agreement. That's actually not the most important thing. Agreement is not the most important thing. Truth is the most important thing. And we are now working together as friends in a common enterprise, albeit a dialectical enterprise, of exchanging reasons, disagreeing, but in a common enterprise of trying to get to the truth of the matter. And there's a beautiful analysis. We discussed this with the students today in the Torrey Honors College. Beautiful analysis provided by John Stuart Mill in the second chapter of On Liberty, the chapter devoted to freedom of thought and discussion, where Mill says there are two possibilities when you are engaged in discussion and debate with someone you disagree with. One possibility is that he's right and you're wrong. Now, if he defeats you in the argument in the sense of showing you the error, the fallacy, the problem in your logic, the error in your premise, that's a defeat you should welcome.
Sure.
Because he's just conferred upon you a great benefit.
Exactly.
He has moved you or helped you to move from error to truth. And if truth is what we think it is, especially as Christians, for whom truth is God's truth. As Christians, people who are devoted to the one who tells us he is the way, the truth, and the life. If we have the appreciation of truth that we ought to have as human beings, and especially as Christians, then we will realize that that friend, because he cannot be an enemy, that friend has conferred upon you an inestimable blessing and benefit. But, Mill says, what if it's the other way around? What if actually you're right and he's wrong? Well, Mill says you still shouldn't shut down his speech or refuse to engage with him, because even if he's wrong, if he's an intellectually serious person, someone who is thinking about this the way you do, and we can all make errors. None of us is 100% right about things, right? So if we're engaging with him and he raises questions that cause us to think, he shows us why reasonable people of goodwill are not all on one side. Even if he's in error, we have learned more deeply. We've been able to appropriate, and not simply notionally to understand, the truth of the thing we believe. We're not left just in the same position, believing the truth as a proposition. We've got a deeper appreciation and understanding of the truth because we've understood why the very best, strongest arguments against what we believe nevertheless fail, despite their strength, despite the reasonableness of the person who is engaging with us. When two people or more are involved in that kind of enterprise, they are bound together by that bond, by that truth-seeking. That's a foundation for friendship that's stronger than anything. Friendship always involves common projects. Even on Facebook, where we have our Facebook friends, there's the common projects that we're discussing on Facebook. It's a virtual friendship, but it's still a friendship because we're integrating ourselves together around common goals. Right? Now, sometimes they're good goals, sometimes they're bad goals, but they're common goals. Well, when your common goal is this highest and best thing, when your common goal is getting to the truth and you're united in that enterprise, you've got something much stronger binding you together than whatever the disagreement is that separates you. And that friendship itself is an integral aspect of our well-being and fulfillment. So now we have not only truth in common, but we have the friendship in common. We form this bond of friendship that arose out of seeking a good together, seeking a common good. That bond is itself an aspect of our well-being and fulfillment, because we human beings are not merely intellectual creatures. We're also relational creatures. And I've learned a great deal from my brother Cornel West here. He's still wrong about some things, but I've learned a great deal from him. But one of the things I have learned is just how powerful that bond of truth-seeking can be, and how deeply it can unite two people in the bond of friendship. And at the end of the day, it's not about whether you reach agreement, even if the disagreement maintains, it stays in place. The bond created by friends dedicated to the truth, working together to get to the truth, is the most powerful thing. So that's why I bless the day that Cornel and I began this enterprise together. And I hope that by our own actions here and in other places, other people will see just how much there is to be gained by civil, and more than simply civil, carefully listening discourse, where we're not just tolerating each other. Yes, I'll listen. I'll sit here and not interrupt you. That's civility. But really listening to what the other guy has to say with the thought that, it's not just that I have something to teach. I've got something to learn too. And I have something to learn even if I'm right about the thing being discussed and my interlocutor is wrong about the thing. Cornel? Oh, yeah.
I just want to say, what Robbie just was talking about is the difference between resolution and reconciliation. They are not the same. You can, if you have a marriage that needs to be reconciled, you can reconcile before you resolve all of the differences.
That's right.
And you can be reconciled to another person without resolving all of your differences. And that's exactly what you were just saying.
I am. And I want to say something about it. Disagreement is no impediment to love, and it's no impediment to joy.
Thank God none of us be married.
That's right, yeah. No, there is nothing for me that is as joy-inducing as seeking the goal of getting to the truth about important matters with an interlocutor, with a friend, with a dear brother who shares that goal, where we've got a common bond that is now uniting us. At some point you will find, if you do this seriously with serious interlocutors, at some point you will find you have gone beyond merely exchanging reasons and arguments. At some point you will suddenly discover, you'll be in the midst of it before you realize what's going on, that the two of you are thinking together. You're not just exchanging reasons, you're thinking together. Last night in our seminar, Professor West and I are teaching at Princeton, wonderful seminar. We have 18 terrific Princeton undergraduates, just brilliant young men and women. We were examining the work of the French existentialist Christian thinker, Gabriel Marcel. And Marcel talks about the relationality of human beings and the importance of tolerance and the importance of dialogue. But then he talks about another level that goes beyond simply in a friendly way exchanging ideas. And he calls this communion. Communion. We human beings should go beyond friendship to communion. When you are no longer just exchanging reasons and arguments, as beneficial as that is to each other, right, to the common project, when you go beyond that to the point where you're thinking together. Thinking together doesn't mean agreeing necessarily. It means thinking together about the project, pushing each other along about the project, thinking together in a way that gets you on the same trajectory, even if you don't in the end end up at the same place. That is communion. And it's a rare thing, but an important thing for human beings to reach that kind of communion.
Brother West.
Absolutely. Well, first, I just want to say that I'm so blessed to be here. That this day has been a very special day. That Biola University is one of the best kept secrets in the country in terms of the quality faculty, the quality students, and the depth of the conviction. Anytime I get a chance to be in dialogue with Brother Robbie, Professor George, it's always a joy. I have a very deep love for my brother, that we have been through hell and high water together.
It's true.
We're two highly misunderstood, misconstrued brothers in the country.
Also true.
That was true. And it's true, we've got deep disagreements and we struggle it out, but it's always in the context of love. And to meet my dear brother Warren in the flesh, it's just a beautiful thing to see you and salute the ways in which you and Sister Kay have been such forces for good here and around the world, and still full of fire. I want to salute the captain of the ship, President Barry Corey, the two brothers who picked us up at the airport, Brother Matthew and our dear brother, Paul.
Oh, Paul.
Yeah. How could I forget Paul? Professor Matthew Wright and Professor Paul Spears. But I do want to say this, that I want to begin on a note of piety, because I think that in our very dark and bleak moment in the cold and cruel world in which we find ourselves, in our fundamental attempt to be in the world and not of it, we ought to begin with an acknowledgement of the sources of good in our lives. I am who I am because somebody loved me. And somebody cared for me. Somebody attended to me. And what are the ways in which I can build on what has been given to me as gift horizontally, as gift vertically, and grace, to keep alive that tradition? Because you were listening to John Coltrane when you came in. And I hope it wasn't just background music. Because John Coltrane is a part and a voice and figure in one of the greatest traditions in the modern world, which is a musical tradition that in the face of catastrophe mustered the courage to bear witness to compassion. In the face of being terrorized for 400 years, decides not to terrorize others, but fight for freedom for everybody. That's Frederick Douglass, that's Sojourner Truth, that's John Coltrane, that's Curtis Mayfield, that's Aretha Franklin, that's Erykah Badu, there's Toni Morrison, James Baldwin. We can just call the roll, as it were. And it's a human tradition, but it's one that I have been blessed to be a part of, not simply because I showed up in a particular family, that West family that's nothing but a love caravan. I wish you could meet my father. I'll never be one half of the human being he was. And then on the Shiloh Baptist Church on the chocolate side of Sacramento, California. Reverend Willie P. Cook, caravan of love as well. Well, we live in a moment, probably the most commodified, commercialized, marketized culture in the history of the world. Every nook and cranny shot through with obsession with money making and profit taking. 30 years ago, that was not the case. We were still the same human beings with the same ugly proclivities, but there's less gas in our spiritual tanks in the present moment. Spiritual malnutrition is much more pervasive. And by spiritual malnutrition, I'm not just talking about an emptiness of soul, but I'm talking about an indifference to the suffering of others, a callousness to those who are catching hell. Great Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel used to say, indifference to evil is more insidious than evil itself. Well, William James, probably the greatest and most lovable and adorable of all public intellectuals in America in the last 200 years, he said, indifference is the one trait that makes the very angels weep. It's the very opposite of what it is to follow the way of the cross as opposed to the dominant ways of the world. And so anytime we talk about civility, I want to begin on a spiritual note and talk about a piety. And by piety, I'm not talking about blind acceptance, and I'm talking about uncritical deference to doctrine or dogma. I'm talking about a way of life in which you acknowledge those sources of good in your life to win at your back, so you remember, so you can revere something bigger than you, and you have the courage to resist in the name of, for me, a kingdom of God, a beloved community. But even if you're not Christian, there's some other good things to fight for. Love, democracy, freedom, and so on. But we never want to lose sight of the specificity of our Christian identity and Christian faith. You see. And what is that specificity? One, the quest for unarmed truth and unconditional love, but it's always a fallible quest. And that unarmed truth, the condition of truth, is to allow suffering to speak. 25th chapter of Matthew, the least of these. The elderly, the children, the widow, the fatherless, the motherless, the physically challenged, the poor, the workers, gay brothers, lesbian sisters pushed to the side. Any group of human beings that our society easily loses sight of their humanity and forgets, even if only for a moment, that they're each individual made in the likeness and the image of God. But also, not just that unarmed truth, but unconditional love. And I think one of the saddest features of our day is American culture is more and more beginning to look like a Hamlet-like condition. Now, Hamlet, as you know, is the most sophisticated philosophical protagonist in all of modern literature, written by the greatest bard in the English the language that many of us dream in, Shakespeare. No, we've got some Spanish brothers and sisters, so I don't want to be culturally imperialist about this. If you dreaming in the language of Cervantes, that's a beautiful thing too. That's beautiful too. Oh yes, the language of Goethe in German or whatever. But the important thing is, Hamlet suffers from the inability to love. And Dostoevsky and the Brothers Karamazov says, hell is defined by those who suffer from the inability to love. Well, American culture more and more becomes a joyless quest for pleasure, insatiable pleasure, never get enough of it, endless, bottomless, and the inability to really be committed to love. Because love is a form of death. And you have to learn how to die in order to learn how to love. That's why the New Testament says what? Christians must die daily. Die daily. What a culture's joyless quest for pleasure is a denial of death. That's why we can easily deny those locked into social death. We can deny those locked into civic death. Those wrestling with psychic death. Spiritual death. We were talking before about wrestling with the issue of mental illness, and you and Kay have been magnificent in your courage. And I've been praying.
Thank you, man.
Magnificent in your courage. But the ways in which it's so easy to lose sight of the precious humanity of those wrestling with the mental illness. I mean, I've been to jail so many times, and at least 1 out of 3 of the brothers and sisters in my cell are wrestling with mental illness.
Sure.
And unable to get medication. And they tend to stand there longer than me, and I stand there long enough. I'm ready to go. I'm ready to get out. But in talking about disagreement, we're not just talking about something political. We're not just talking about even something civil. We're talking about something spiritual. You see, something profoundly spiritual. And for Christians, it is inescapably spiritual. You see. And in the end, of course, it's an acknowledgement of having a hermeneutical humility and an intellectual humility, acknowledging that you could be wrong, and there's a good chance that you are at times wrong. But you're still willing to stand in your truth and try to speak your truth and opt for a deep integrity rather than a cheap popularity. Because so oftentimes in America, to be popular is to be well adjusted to injustice. Well, see, that's not the kind of popularity Christians ought to be interested in. To be popular, being well adapted to indifference, that's not the kind of popularity Christians ought to be interested in. The benchmark of the Christian way of life, of the way of the cross, is there goes some of those strange folk who look like they're fools in the eyes of the world, who are still trying to love against the grain, knowing that justice is what love looks like in public, just like tenderness is what love feels like in private. And you say, oh, those are those strange ones. That's where it was in the early church, wasn't it? Those are those strange ones still talking about love, obsessed with that Palestinian Jew named Jesus who was enacting, embodying that love. You say, yes, that's right, you got it right. That's right, you got it right. That's what we're about. So in that sense, I do want to begin on that pietistic note and a spiritual note. Because I'll end, I think Reinhold Niebuhr put it so well when he said, any justice that's only justice soon degenerates into something less than justice.
Good point. Yeah.
Justice must be rescued by something much more deeper than justice, which is love. Love of truth, love of neighbor, and for me, love of enemy. And we won't go into that now, but I think that's very, very important. Because it means then even your foe is part of the human family. And in some ways an extension of your own humanity. Because for most of us, I know in my case, that I was a gangster before I met Jesus, and now I'm a redeemed sinner with gangster proclivities.
Yeah, that's it.
Pray for me, pray for me.
That's it. You know, I knew moderating this was going to be easy. Because I had all these questions here. I've got 100 questions just on just what you guys just talked about. You know, when you were saying about with a gangster proclivity, one of the things, we have a program in our church that was started in Saddleback called Celebrate Recovery. And it is a Christian 12-step based on the Beatitudes. And one of the things that makes it different from Alcoholics Anonymous, at Alcoholics Anonymous, you stand up and for 40 years, you may have not had a drink in 40 years, you'll stand up and say, hi, I'm Joe and I'm an alcoholic. You're making your primary identity with your weakness. We don't let people do that in Celebrate Recovery. We stand up and say, hi, my name's Joe, and I'm a follower of Jesus who struggles with alcohol.
Yeah.
Big difference.
Absolutely.
My primary identity is not in my sin. It's not in my weakness. It's in my relationship to Christ. Now, was that good or what these guys just said? I mean, it's like, thank you all. God bless you. Have a great evening. We'll see you later. All right. That was just unbelievable. Wow. I really have a lot of questions, but let's just forget these questions and let me ask you this. Robbie talked all about truth and Cornel talked all about love. Let's talk about the interplay between these two things.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, let's just talk about because I'm thinking here, my mind is just reeling. I'm thinking, there's a verse in Isaiah where it says, truth is dying in the streets.
Yes.
Truth is dying in the streets. And I know we all believe that. Truth is dying. But there's also a verse over in Timothy where it says that in the last days, men will be lovers of pleasure, lovers of themselves more than lovers of God.
Yeah.
We know that's true too. Now, the Bible tells us that Jesus was full of grace and truth. He's the only one who had this balance, full of grace and full of truth. And Ephesians tells us to speak the truth in love. So I want you to both, and don't give me a slogan answer. Go ahead and go deep on this. Where do you see the interplay between truth and love? Because some people use love to fudge on the truth, and some people use truth in a very unloving way. So let's talk about that.
Well, number one, we've got to be serious about what the truth is about love. We have to have the true understanding of what love is. Sometimes intellectual historians divide up the epochs and put names on them. So sometimes the medieval period is called the Age of Faith, and the Enlightenment period is called the Age of Reason. Well, if the medieval period is the Age of Faith and the Enlightenment period is the Age of Reason, what age do we live in? We live in the age of feeling. The age of feeling. Feeling is the touchstone of everything, the measure of everything. And what do we do with the concept of love in the age of feeling? We reinterpret or we retranslate love into a feeling. Love is a matter of feeling, and love is a matter of respecting people's feelings, or stroking people, or making people feel good, because feeling is the touchstone of everything. Well, whatever that is, that's not the Christian understanding of love. Christian love is not a matter of feeling. It's a matter of volition. It is the active willing of the good of the other for the sake of the other. And I'll tell you something, that makes it hard to love. If it's just a matter of feeling, that's not so hard. Well, with some people it's hard. But it's hard to love some people because you can't feel very good about them. But it kind of makes it easy on us to just treat being nice to everybody and stroking everybody and saying, oh yeah, I'm okay, you're okay. Remember that book, I'm okay, you're okay? Not exactly the purpose-driven life, but it was, very well-known book, sold a lot of copies.
I'd say, I'm not okay, and you're not okay, but that's okay, because God says we're okay.
And we're in big trouble. So once we understand the truth about love, we understand that loving is a lot harder than you think it is, because sometimes love involves tough love. And this is where disagreement again comes into the picture. Because when we disagree with people, sometimes we have to tell them hard truths. We have to be open, as Brother Cornel said, to the possibility that we're wrong and in need of revising our view. Maybe we need to hear a hard truth coming from the other side, but sometimes we need to deliver hard truths when it would be easier to say nothing or to go along with whatever the trends in the culture are. A culture that, as Cornel says, loves pleasure and prestige and status and these fleeting things. Or it'd be easier just to stroke people and say, I'm okay, you're okay, or certainly you're okay whether I'm okay or not. But that's not loving people, and sometimes we really have to deliver a message. Now, sometimes when Christians say, well, look, I've got to speak the truth in love, but I do have to speak the truth, other people will respond to that by saying, you, Christians, are just guilty of prejudice, and you hide your prejudice behind the idea that you should hate the sin and love the sinner. They want to tell us that by rejecting the sin, we are rejecting the sinner. And we're all too often so intimidated or so unwilling to bear the consequences of truly loving, because it really is hard, that we go silent or even capitulate. But that's not love. What our obligation in those situations is to say, no matter what you call me, no matter what the consequences are for me, I am going to speak the truth in love. And I'm going to speak the truth because I love you. If I tell you you shouldn't be doing that, you shouldn't be going down that road, if I criticize your ideology because I think that ideology is destructive and contrary to human well-being, contrary to your well-being, you are going to be called names. I'm going to be called names if I do that. But that's what speaking the truth in love really is all about. It means getting, first of all, to the truth about what love is. It's not being a feeling. And then the responsibilities that come with truly loving, which can be really hard because it can bring the wrath of the culture, the dominant power in the culture, down upon you. But that's what we're called to do. I mean, Jesus didn't say, come and follow me and you're going to be really rich. Come and follow me, you're going to be really popular. Come and follow me and man, things are going to go good for you.
He said, if they hate me, they're going to hate you.
That's right. And he said, if you want to be my disciple, take up your cross and follow me. Now, what does that actually mean in practice? That means being willing to take the slings and arrows that come with other people thinking really badly of you because you're out of touch with the dominant ideology of the time. But still, we've got to do it. Can I tell a little story on Cornel since I have the microphone?
Well, you know, he's often called a prophet, which is someone called to speak the truth.
No, but I'm not a prophet. I'm my mama's child and daddy's kid. That's all.
We got the prophet, the non-prophet, the whole prophet.
No prophet.
I got to tell my Cornel story since he told about how many times he went to jail. So I was elected chairman of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, but this is not a story about me. And I was going to be sworn in by Chief Justice Roberts at the U.S. Supreme Court in the Marble Temple. It was magnificent. I invited my family. That was a wonderful honor and opportunity for me. But I since this was going to be a human rights job, chairing the commission, I wanted my dear friend and brother Cornel West to come and hold the Bible for me when I was sworn in. And I wanted a proper Bible. So I asked, and they graciously granted my request. I asked the people at the Harriet Tubman House in Auburn, New York, to let me borrow Harriet Tubman's Bible for Brother Cornel to hold for me to be sworn in on. Well, that's not what the story is. Now we get to the story.
Sorry, your time's up. Go ahead, Cornel.
We're walking up the steps to the Marble Temple. Of course, they've got a good deal of security around there. And one of the guards looks over, one of the police officers looks over at Cornel, gives him the look. And I'm thinking to myself, what's going on here? And Cornel looked over at me and he said, you know, Brother Robbie, this is the first time I've ever been to the Supreme Court where I wasn't coming here to be arrested.
That's true.
That was speaking the truth.
That's right.
Speaking the truth.
He was there as an honored guest of the Chief Justice. We had a wonderful time in the chambers. We had a beautiful ceremony. We got photographed with Harriet Tubman's Bible. It doesn't get better than that. That was great.
And the fact that it was tied to Brother Robbie keeping track of precious human beings, be they Muslims, be they Jews, be they Christians, be they Baha'i faith and others who are wrestling with very vicious persecution. And how do you keep track of them? But for me, when you talk about love and truth, though, it has so much to do with courage. You know, we used to sing a song in my church, must Jesus bear the cross alone? And all the world go free. No, there's a cross for everyone. And there's a cross for me. And you can't talk about that cross unless you're talking about unbelievable courage. And you see, we live in a culture of superficial spectacle where people are more and more convinced that the highest level of attainment is to be smart and have big dollars. And the worst thing in the world is to aspire to be simply the smartest person in the room. Let the phones be smart. You ought to be wise. Compassionate. Courageous. But in a market-driven culture, courage has to generate some short-term gain or some short-term pay, or it's held at arm's length. You see. And so you really can't talk about telling the truth unless you're willing to be courageous. I mean, the greatest modern Christian thinker, in my view, was Søren Kierkegaard. He said to be a Christian is to do what? To live dangerously. See, most Christians want to be safe. They want security. See, it's blessed assurance. It's not blessed security.
Good line.
It's not
I'm going to tweet that.
But it's very important.
They've already done it.
They've already done it. That's good.
It's not rational certainty. It's blessed assurance. You're standing on the promises, not premises. Not logical premises, not geographical premises. So you got to be free enough to be courageous, to be led and to learn how to die. And to learn how to die is what? Critically examine yourself. It could be Socratic, it could be prophetic or whatever. To render yourself accountable to the highest standards. In the same way John Coltrane, he's rendering himself accountable to Johnny Hodges, Charlie Parker. And he knows he can't aspire, he can't go beyond them. They're the highest standards. And yet what does he do? He creates new levels in his standards because he's critically examining himself. He's learning how to die in order to learn how to love, and gives us love supreme. Deep. Not me. Coltrane, not Coltrane, the tradition. Not just the tradition, the best of what it is to be human. Black people have no monopoly on it, but when you've been wrestling with social death and civic death and psychic death and spiritual death for 400 years and hate it so intensely, you can teach the world something about love if you are courageous. Thank you, Martin King. Thank you, Stevie Wonder. Thank you, Fannie Lou Hamer. Right now, the moment in Baltimore. Rage, catastrophe. How will the rage be filtered? Through love and justice or hatred and revenge? Crucial question. Not just for black people, not just for Baltimore, for America. And without that courage, then the love and the truth is suspended, and what kicks in? The ways of the world. Hatred, revenge, envy, resentment, domination, oppression, exploitation, the same old story that the cross was trying to interrupt. The cross trying to disrupt. Brother Oscar Owens knows what I'm talking about from West Angelique. We've been talking about this in Union Seminary for 35 years with James Washington and others. Same story, but new circumstances, new conditions. And I think, thank God, we've got a younger generation who are just tired of the obsession with smartness and dollars. They want something deeper. They want something more real. They want something more livable. They want a stronger armor. The 6th chapter of Ephesians is no joke. You got to thicken that armor. Put it on. Get on the battlefield. And love. And learn how to die. And then offer it all to the glory of God. Because it's not about you. It's not about your ego. It's about something much, much grander. Actually, it's a mystery.
What Marcel calls a mystery.
Exactly. It is a mystery.
In other words, not a problem to be solved. It's something to be entered into and explored more and more deeply. It can't be exhausted. It's not like, figuring out whether the planet Pluto exists or doesn't exist. That's a problem. Scientists put their mind to the problem. They use the technology they have to solve the problem. Does it exist or not exist? The important questions about leading a human life, what it means to be a human being, are not problems that can be solved. Too much of modern thought is premised on the idea that the great existential questions are problems to be solved.
Good question.
Ultimately, to be solved by the application of therapeutic methods. We live not only in an age of feeling, but in an age that tries to transform existential spiritual issues into therapeutic
personal
problems.
fulfillment.
Exactly. Yeah.
And the tremendous authority of science and the fetishizing of technology. So
Which is not to say that science is a bad thing. No, science is a good thing. Not to say technology is a bad thing. Technology is a good thing. But technology is not going to give you salvation. Science is not going to give you salvation. It's not going to answer the deepest longings of the human heart. And when we think it will, we are just setting ourselves up for a profound disappointment, alienation, and cynicism.
Well, what you both quoted, deny yourself, take up your cross. Which is the exact opposite of what society teaches. In those days, nobody took up the cross unless the Romans were going to nail him to it. He's saying, come and die. Right? In fact, it's interesting that the very first words of Jesus in his public ministry are 3 words: come and see. Come and see. Jesus goes out to the Jordan River, he's baptized. The next day he goes out, Jordan River again. John turns to 2 of his disciples, Andrew and John, says, there goes the Lamb of God, follow him. And Andrew asked the first question of Jesus in his public ministry. He said, where are you going, Lord? And Jesus gives a simple answer, come and see.
Come and see.
Now, that's about as low level of commitment as you can get.
Come and see.
You don't have to sing anything, sign anything, sacrifice anything, just come and see. Check it out. And that's where we start with people. But we don't leave them there. We move. The whole business of sanctification, the whole business of spiritual formation is moving people from come and see to come and die, which is what you were talking about. Now, I want to go back to this issue because both of you talked about humility and being humble in the fact that we might not be right. I believe in the inerrancy of Scripture. I do not believe in the inerrancy of my interpretations. Okay, I could get those wrong on occasions. So let's go to humility and civility and put those things together. I think humility is maybe one of the most misunderstood character qualities. A lot of people think humility means going around putting yourself down. Oh, I'm nothing, I'm no good, I'm nothing, I'm junk. Jesus did not die for junk. You want to know how valuable you are? Look at the cross.
That's right.
Okay, Jesus did not die for junk.
And the depths of
you
the
are
love
deeply flawed,
yes,
but you are very valuable. You are deeply flawed, and you are a sinner, and I'm a sinner.
Yeah, we're lowly dust of the earth, yet made in the image and likeness of the divine creator and ruler of the universe. Both of those are true.
So let's talk about humility. I think humility is not denying your strengths. Humility is being honest about your weaknesses. And Paul says, follow me as I follow Christ, but he says, I'm the chief among sinners. And he could be very honest about saying, follow me, because he was also very honest about all the stuff he did wrong. And he writes it down for posterity. Mm-hmm. So talk to me about how humility and civility go together, both of you. Cornel, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, I start off reflecting on humility as a response to an ontological condition. And what I mean by that is we are the kind of beings who are cracked vessels. We are the kind of beings who are fallen and finite. And therefore, it's, on the one hand, just an acknowledgement of the sheer facticity of who we are. So people who run around thinking somehow that they're entitled and have access to something because they're better, they're not just arrogant, but they're living a lie. And therefore, they're in denial. I mean, look at, for example, the legacy of white supremacy, or we could talk about any other anti-Jewish, anti-Arab, anti-Muslim ideologies, or anti-women, or whatever. But let's just look at the legacy of white supremacy. It is an ideology that tries to convince persons that somehow they're better and superior than others, and it's just not true. Now, of course, it's alive, but it's a lie. It can operate, but it's just not true. You're living a life of mendacity in that sense. So what Christianity comes along and says, I'm going to remind you from whence you come. Made in the image and likeness of God, elevated. Sanctity. We say dignity now, but that comes from the Stoics, our pagan brothers and sisters. But for Christians, it's sanctity. Exactly. And we're trying to sanctify the world to the degree to which this kingdom of God can work through us as cracked vessels. Okay. And at the same time, an acknowledgement that we can't do it alone. You're going to need a whole lot of help, a lot of aid, a lot of grace. And hence the humility, the response.
That's that verse where Paul says, work out your salvation with fear and trembling, for it is God who works in you. Now notice it doesn't say work for your salvation. It says work out. When I go to a gym, I'm not going to get muscle, to create muscle. I'm going to strengthen the muscle God gave me. I didn't get that muscle. It was a gift. So work out means develop what you got. But it says while you're working out, God is working in. That's what you're saying.
Ooh, that's nice.
You can tweet that one because I'm going to tweet yours. You know, I always say the first time you quote something, you say, now Rick says, and then the second time you usually say, it's been said. And then the third time you usually say, you know, I've always thought. If you use it 3 times, it's yours, man.
No, but it's getting that.
Well, to relate to the humility virtue to the main subject matter of this evening's conversation, intellectual humility, I would say that the key to that really is recognizing our fallibility, understanding that though we are rational creatures, we've been endowed with this remarkable, literally godlike gift of reason, of rationality. Our reason is imperfect. Theologians call this the consequence of, or the noetic consequences of sin. That sin not only weakens our will to do the right thing, it darkens the intellect. As a natural law theorist, it pains me to admit that, but it is actually true. Yeah. Well, no, that's it's somewhere
right here.
So we have to recognize that we are fallen creatures and that we can be mistaken about things. But let me tell you what intellectual humility in the current context is not. It's not supposing that I must yield or bow, give up my own judgment about right or wrong or good or bad or true or false or just or unjust, to bring myself into line with the dominant ideology of the secular culture. That's not intellectual humility. I don't know what that is. That's conformism. That's going along to get along or getting along to go along. It's not what intellectual humility is. Intellectual humility recognizes fallibility, and so it's willing to enter into conversation, into dialogue with somebody who's got some reasons to give against your view or against your interpretation. Now, that applies to people when we're interacting with people who've got a secular argument against Christianity, to an atheist who wants to engage us. We should be listening to him. We are fallible. We could be wrong about the God question. I said that at Biola. We could be wrong about the God question. I don't think we are, actually.
I'm betting my life we're not.
We're all betting our lives that we're not. Absolutely. But we need to be willing to listen, and not just sit respectfully and listen, but actually hear what somebody who will actually defend the secularist or atheistic point of view. Listen to what he has to say. Think about the credibility of what he's saying, and then say what we have to say in response to that. Now, those are two very different things. Actually listening and trying to learn and being open to the possibility of wrong is one thing. Just capitulating to get yourself in line with cultural orthodoxies is another thing altogether. That is not intellectual humility.
Well, that's also the new terminology, the new definition of tolerance. Tolerance used to mean I treat you with respect and dignity, even if I totally disagree with you. I will treat you with respect and dignity. And as Cornel said, you're made in God's image, and I'm gonna treat you with that kind of value. Today, tolerance for a lot of people means all ideas are equally valid. Well, that's nonsense. The person who says the moon is made of cheese, the other one says the moon's made of rock, are not equally valid ideas. All ideas are not equally valid, and that's what you're saying, is that humility is not saying, well, whatever you want to just believe.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, even when it comes to the interpretation of Scripture, Scripture does require interpretation, and you're right. We may believe that the Scripture's telling the truth, but we can't be absolutely certain that we're interpreting the Scripture correctly, which means we have to be in dialogue with each other and with others. We need the church, exactly right. But if we are driven to a particular interpretation of Scripture, not by anything internal to the Scripture or the Christian tradition itself, or in virtue of the correct use of the philosophical tools that are available to us to bring to bear to interpret more accurately what has been said, but rather, again, if we're being driven to a particular interpretation because that will get us in line with a secular cultural orthodoxy, then whatever that is, that's not Christianity. It's simply deforming the witness of the church to make it conform so we can hang on to the consolations of Christian faith, such as they are, without having to actually witness to the Christian faith, which is a scandal to the world and always has been.
Absolutely. I think part of the problem has been, though, and this is where I want to defend my secular brothers and sisters, that we needed the pluralizing and secularizing of public discourse, because so much of the record of institutional religion has been one of intolerance, if not outright persecution. So that the secular folk had, and we got to keep in mind, most of those secular folk came through religious traditions, came through Christian traditions, were taught to love the truth, and discovered, lo and behold, the churches are less interested in the truth than power, because they had adjusted themselves to monarchs, they had adjusted themselves to elites at the top. Whereas Jesus had just told them to be love-struck, period. Not colorblind, not concerned about what your politics are, not concerned about what your sexual orientation is, not concerned about what nation you are. You're supposed to just love these folk. You say, wow. That's serious. Now that means that on a broader sense, all of us are going to be failures, because you're going to have institutional expressions of this that reinforce not just hierarchy, but power, domination, and so forth. So the secular folk had to come along and say, look, we got to create a public space where people can enter with respect and without humiliation, because these state churches and these institutional religious practices don't create this public space. That's what liberalism was. Now, I'm not a liberal, but I appreciate the insights of liberalism vis-a-vis kings and monarchs and vis-a-vis state churches. The American Revolution was what? An attempt to ensure a pluralism in public life, in public discourse for religious, non-religious, for Mormons, for agnostics, and so forth and so on. That was an achievement in the species. The problem, of course, is that it was also tied to empire and imperialism. It mistreated indigenous peoples. It enslaved Africans. It reinforced patriarchal households for precious sisters of all colors. But it still created this space, and then we have to build on being love-struck as we connect to those issues of patriarchy and racism and imperialism and so on, you see.
Well, I'm going to make two points about that.
Would you accept that formulation, Brother?
If you'll allow me a distinction.
Okay.
Let me tell you what the distinction is. There's a distinction between a secular public sphere that is a civil public sphere in which all citizens can enter on terms of equality and vie for the allegiance of their fellow citizens. And then there is secularism, which is a worldview, a pseudo-religion that competes with the great traditions of faith and other secular systems. The trouble with our dear secular brothers and sisters, and we work with them every day and we love them as we must as Christians, and many of them are quite lovable, and so it's not too difficult. The trouble is,
and some of them are very wise.
They're not proposing in so many cases a secular and civil public square, but rather the establishment of secularism as the governing public philosophy of the United States.
I'm critical
so,
of that.
and the record of secularism, and we as Christians should be the first to criticize the flaws and the errors of Christian history, the sins committed in the name of the church by officials of the church, by Christians ourselves. We should be the first. But let's not deceive ourselves into thinking that the record of secularism is pure. The record of secularism is horrific. It gave us fascism. It gave us communism. It gave us eugenics. It was the great and the good. It was the leaders of the powerful corporations, of the great foundations, even the mainline churches, that embraced the dogmas of eugenics, expressed by no less an establishment figure than Oliver Wendell Holmes in his famous opinion in Buck against Bell, upholding the mandatory sterilization of an allegedly feeble-minded woman under a Virginia law on the theory that 3 generations of imbeciles is enough. That wasn't Christians that were embracing, at least it wasn't traditionalist Christians that were embracing that, although too many Christians of the mainline fell in line with it. It was the secular liberal elite that went for it hook, line, and sinker and didn't abandon it until Hitler gave it a bad name, and guess what? It's now coming back. But in a different dress, in a different rhetoric, in the language of autonomy and choice and liberty and so forth. So we have to be very careful.
Absolutely. And I think if we look at all of these traditions as human traditions, then we know there's going to have some ugly undersides and some nice sides.
Which is why we always have to be open to argument.
But let's look at one figure who sits atop much of what we're talking about, and that's the great Anton Chekhov. Now, Chekhov is, in some ways, secular because he's agnostic. He's a medical doctor. He's tending to the poor during the day and writing some of the greatest plays. I'm told he's going to have the Seagull here May the 8th. I wish I could be here, but I will be here in spirit for that Chekhov play. But he goes through the Russian Orthodox Church. He fundamentally committed to the notion condemnation of none, forgiveness for all. There's probably more in Chekhov's corpus than there are in many Christian churches.
Yeah, I agree with that.
In terms of love. But he can't accept the Christian consolation, even though he's fundamentally not just committed, he enacts and embodies the Christian compassion. He goes to church on Sundays, he's moved by the passion, and he simply says, it's too beautiful to be true. So he's got a deep Christian sensibility. He reminds me of Simone Weil.
Simone Weil, the great French thinker. That's right.
She's a Jesusophile. She's in love with Jesus, but she can't accept Christ.
In the end, everyone wonders, and she doesn't accept baptism.
She will not accept.
In love with Jesus and doesn't accept
right
baptism.
to the edge in that sense. So is Chekhov then in some sense secular? Yes. Does he represent so much of the great insights of our own tradition in terms of love? Yes, he gets it out of Christian churches, Russian Orthodox version, right? And he exemplifies levels of humility, truth-telling, acknowledgement of his own fallibility, and of course such a great
I think
writer.
it's important to even though point out is that even the secularism in our society today had Christian roots.
Well,
Yes.
this
And we've got this cut flower syndrome where you cut off the roots. Flower looks good for a while, but it's eventually
But
going to go.
it's
Liberalism is actually
depleting the capital.
The liberalism has changed in its meaning. When I was a kid, liberalism would say to our government as we were going overseas, don't impose Western values on other cultures. Let them be their own. That would be classic liberalism. Okay, don't impose our values. Now, because I'm in the peace plan, because I've been in dozens and dozens and dozens of countries, I've seen it now where the government is saying to people, we're not going to give you aid unless you agree with us on abortion and on all these other issues that they've got.
homosexuality.
And now they are imposing their values. It's the exact opposite of what it was 50 years ago.
No, that's absolutely true. And you're right that we are depleting the capital that was built up by Judeo-Christian civilization. We're not paying anything in, we're just living off the capital. And I think in the long term, that's really quite scary. Even in the medium term, that's really quite scary. But I think Professor West is absolutely right to bring Chekhov into this. And what we've got in Chekhov is not a sort of standard issue liberal secularist at all of the sort we would recognize today. We've got a man with and a great genius, an artistic genius, with a profound Christian sensibility. I think it would be fair to say, tell me if you would agree with it, I think it would be fair to say that the following proposition is true. No Christianity, no Chekhov. Without Christianity, there could not be Chekhov and the contributions of Chekhov.
Chekhov knew the difference between hope and optimism.
Yes, he did.
Yeah, that's a big deal.
And in some sense, the blues idiom was the idiom of the 20th century, which is the most barbaric and bestial and brutal of all recorded time. 150 million fellow precious human beings killed. And that blues that was created by black folk in America. Not just the music, the idiom, catastrophe, catastrophe, catastrophe. What you gonna do about it? Will it be compassion? Will it be wisdom? Will it be revenge, hatred? Chekhov is a poet of catastrophe, but he situates it in the everyday life, the misery of everyday life. But it is catastrophe, but it's so much love coming in it. But the difference between Chekhov and the blues is that the blues is in some sense still American. See, we Americans, we romantic folk. It's like that green light at the end of F. Scott Fitzgerald's great novel, The Great Gatsby. Gatsby still believed in the green light. That's America. Tomorrow will be better. Tomorrow will be. Just wait until tomorrow. We ascribe metaphysical status to the future, the futurity. Whereas Chekhov was not American. Even the blues say, like, get up in the morning. Well, that was bad, but tomorrow morning gonna be better.
Chekhov's not saying the sun will come out tomorrow.
Exactly. He's Russian in that sense. He's Russian in that sense.
On the other hand, each culture has its contribution to make, and God bless the Russian culture. It's given us such magnificent works of literature and poetry and drama and so forth. But I think we've got our contribution to make as well, and I wouldn't want America to give up that sense of hope. I would say hope more than optimism. When it degenerates into mere optimism, it's not worth anything.
Optimism is psychological. Hope is theological.
Hope is theological, a theological virtue. And it cannot really exist apart from the other theological virtues. Without love and faith, there is no hope, just as without hope, there can't be love and faith.
But most American culture is about optimism. It's not about hope.
We're going to have to take some questions from the internet in just a minute, but I want to ask one more, Cornel. Because this thing's called free to disagree.
Absolutely.
How do you define freedom? And what does freedom mean to you?
How do I define freedom?
Yeah, what does it mean to you? And take as much time as you need on this.
Yeah, it's a wonderful question. See, I think there is no such thing as freedom without it being over against some constraints. So that liberty is not reduced to licentiousness, it's just license in that way. But freedom for me is so rooted in well, put it this way. I mean, the early Karl Barth defined the gospel as radical love in freedom and radical freedom in love. So that I wouldn't want to define freedom independent of the love, and I wouldn't want to define freedom in just an individualistic mode. You see, I would want to define freedom as us being, yes, individuals with a certain sanctity, but always against the matrix of family, community, tradition, and then God and kingdom.
Okay, so there's some fundamental values that are holding up freedom.
Yeah. I mean,
well, love is not really a value, though. Love is a way of life, a mode of existence. Value is a little bit too textbook-like in that sense. It doesn't cut deep enough. You know what I mean? That's the existential point in that sense, though,
Our founders talked about ordered liberty. The American experiment in Republican government was an experiment in ordered liberty, and they drew precisely the distinction that Brother Cornel drew between liberty and license. License is the freedom to do what you want, when you want, however you want, with whomever you want, no matter the reason. Ordered liberty is liberty morally ordered to the good, empowering us, enabling us, removing the constraints in our way so that we can go out and accomplish our vocations, the things that we are called to do, the things that are fully in line with the integral well-being of human beings, to pursue our own, say, artistic ventures, our political causes, our communion, our brotherhood together. It's freedom for service. For service, really. So I think we have to bear that understanding in mind. Now, why did they call it an experiment in ordered liberty or an experiment in Republican government? It's because past efforts, earlier efforts to form republics, to give up authoritarian regimes, give up kings, give up strong men, give up Cromwellian-type rulers, had all failed. And the temptation was to think that human beings simply can't be governed by themselves. They can't be governed as Republican citizens. They always have to be subjected to government. So in the very first Federalist paper, the Publius, as the pseudonym, tells us that the real question that this Constitution that was being proposed places is, can human beings be governed by reflection and choice? Or is the fate of human beings always to be governed by accident and force? They knew that question did not have a definitive answer. And so they proposed the Constitution as an experiment to see what the answer would be, like scientists doing an experiment to see what the answer would be. If the Constitution survives, if we live by the Constitution, if we maintain Republican government, we will have proven that.
And yet they divided up the power so that because of the fallibility of man.
Oh yes, if you look at the 10th Federalist paper, it's all about how depraved human beings, you know, as a Southern Baptist, you'll appreciate this. You know, it's all about how depraved human beings are, and therefore they can't be trusted with power. You need power to check power. Lincoln at Gettysburg, when he reflects on the question, why did we do this? Why did we fight this war? Why did we not simply let the South secede? Why all this carnage and bloodshed? Far more than anybody, except perhaps Sherman, ever imagined it would be. The war has gone on longer than anybody thought. The carnage has been more astounding than anybody thought, as he'd say in the second inaugural address. Well, what was the reason? Here was the reason. To establish, to ensure that government of the people, by the people, and for the people. All governments of the people, right? But government by the people and for the people. In other words, Republican government does not perish from what? The North American continent? No, from the earth. He was recalling the founders' idea of an experiment in ordered liberty. We needed to pay the heavy cost, the terrible carnage of the war, in order to ensure that the Republican experiment could continue in the hope that it would be vindicated and that we would show that government of the people, by the people, and for the people could endure. If it had failed, Lincoln feared, this is why he fought the war, If it failed here because of secession, leading to further secessions, leading to a disintegration of the American experiment, leading to an American Napoleon, if that happened, the message for all time in the indefinite future that people across the world would take from it is that Republican government is a noble dream that can never work. We're dependent on kings and authoritarian rulers and strongmen.
But see, this is where though the thickness of evil and the darkness of history comes, because even given the majestic words and the magnificent experiment in democracy that we associate with the USA, first, it's on somebody else's land. You see what I mean? It's on somebody else's land. So that you got an indigenous population in that same Constitution, talk about savages and so forth and so on. Secondly, the slave issue that you don't get in the U.S. Constitution. There's no reference to it, just a slave trade. So you got denial, and you end up fighting an ugly, barbaric civil war over an institution not invoked in your Constitution.
That's going back to not wanting to hurt their feelings of the South.
It comes back, you see. Now Lincoln, part of the genius of Lincoln, and of course Lincoln was someone who was able to grow because he was for sending black folk out of the country up until 1862. Because he just felt they couldn't live together. De Tocqueville makes the same point in the last chapter of the greatest text written on democracy in America. You see that they're saying this is how deep white supremacy cuts. And Lincoln was just honest about that. Like you say, his best friend was a slaveholder, right?
Lincoln's best friend.
Yes, absolutely. Right. Lincoln was just honest about that. And Lincoln just figured, look, I love black folk, but I got a lot of cousins. And I know them very well, and I'm telling you what they think about Negroes. So, so Lincoln's just honest. And this is a man with 1 year of formal education. So we want all the students here at this wonderful place to graduate. But Lincoln never went to college, but at least 2 went through him. That's self-education, wisdom, Shakespeare, Bible. You see what I mean? Now we were just blessed to have him at that particular moment when the country almost went under. But then what happens after the death of Lincoln? Here comes slavery by another name called Jim Crow. You see what I mean?
But were we not blessed to have our founders? They were fallible, they were frail, they made terrible mistakes. Jefferson was a slaveholder. Adams and Hamilton were profoundly against slavery, of course. So it was a mix. Washington owned slaves, but he freed them in his will. But aren't we blessed by the experiment and ordered liberty that our founders gave us? What if it didn't happen?
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I mean, that's part of the dialectical tension, because on the one hand, their efforts did facilitate the creation of a social order that was fallible, open to revision with amendments and so forth. And that's very important. And the checks and balances, very important. But at the same time, the scope and the depth of the suffering that went on between 1789 and 1865. So you had this Constitution that was a pro-slavery document in practice, no matter what the words said, you see. All of that suffering, and we don't calculate, because we're not engaging in just a calculation. So that I do support the democratic experiment called the USA. I just recognize it was also an adventure in empire. And I also recognize it was a night side that we continue to have to deal with all the way up to Baltimore.
The compromise on slavery made the Constitution and the Republic possible. That doesn't mean we affirm slavery. Obviously, we do not. The people on the anti-slavery side, on the racial justice side, who agreed to the compromise, the Adamses and the Hamiltons, others. Franklin eventually became a strong opponent of slavery. He had owned a slave early in his life, became an opponent. Why did they make the compromise? Why were they willing to do it? Because they thought they needed to vindicate the idea of Republican government, and they could do it in such a way as to put slavery, in Lincoln's words later, on the road to extinction. There wasn't the option of immediate abolition. It was not an effective option. Those of us who work in the pro-life movement, Rick and I are involved in that. Often people say, well, look, America's a bad place because it's got such a terrible record on abortion. We need to abolish abortion immediately. Well, that's not a practical reality. So some of us say, no. Let's do the incremental steps. Let's do the work step by step to roll back the abortion license, just as Lincoln and the other anti-slavery people went step by step to roll back the institution of slavery. Sometimes you can't have the ideal just right here and now, but you got to be moving in the right direction, putting in place a system of principles and institutions that holds the most promise of justice down the road. I don't think you disagree with that.
Well, no, I understand what you're saying, but because you're talking now in prudential terms.
Yeah.
And that, we understand prudence and practical wisdom, very important. But at the same time, you and I agree that there's still this righteous indignation of what those who have to pay the cost of that prudential compromise. And we agree with that.
I agree.
Now think, for example, though, just briefly in American history, what if the 180,000 black soldiers did not join the Union Army? What if the Confederacy had won? Then we'd said, well, 1789, we got to move step by step, and sooner or later we move it in the right direction. But the Confederacy won. Yeah. So how many steps we gonna take down this long road before black humanity is affirmed? You see what I mean? That's also a perspective that we have to wrestle with.
But what's the alternative? The question is always, what's the alternative? You know, what's the better strategy? If we got the practical goal of eliminating a great evil, slavery in its day, or what I believe abortion is in its day. If we have that goal, we need the most practical strategy that will get us there. Do you remember Frederick Douglass's great tribute to Lincoln? Now, Douglass wasn't always favorable toward Lincoln. He was very critical of Lincoln.
Slave hound from Illinois after that first inauguration. That's Brother Douglass right there. That's Brother Fred.
That's right. When Lincoln died,
but he was talking about Lincoln's support of the Fugitive Slave Act, which is one of the most barbaric acts in the history of the country, and Lincoln supported it. But go right ahead.
When Lincoln died, you're making it easy. Right. When Lincoln died, Douglass paid tribute to him.
Yes, he did.
And he paid tribute to him, and I can't quote the exact language, but I'll give you the flavor of it. He said, reflecting on Lincoln's career and his achievements, he said, from the pure abolition viewpoint, Lincoln was slow, dull, hesitant, not moving forward as quickly as we would have liked. And yet, judged from the point of view of statesmanship, as we must judge him, Douglass said. Douglass came down on one side of that question. Do we judge him from the pure abolition point of view or from the statesmanship point of view? From the statesmanship point of view, he was swift, effective, determined. He was taking steps that would be the best steps available to put slavery on the road to extinction. John Brown was not going to eliminate slavery.
No, but John Brown said, we got more than a problem. We got a catastrophe on our hands.
Yeah.
That was his witness. Now, unfortunately, he was killing innocent people. I think anybody who kills innocent people.
But he was not. But that effort was not going to end slavery. If slavery was going to end, it wasn't going to be by John Brown inciting slavery.
No, but John Brown said the only way you're going to end slavery is bloodshed, and it turned out to be that.
Yeah, but not John Brown's method of bloodshed.
No, not the method, but he just said it's going to be bloodshed and war.
Prosecuting a war.
And it turned out to be that and that.
I think this is a very profound question that these guys are talking about right now, and that is, how much do you compromise when people are really suffering?
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you just go slow? Do you go as fast as you can? Do you go strategic? I asked this question in another format 8 years ago when McCain and Obama were running against each other. And I did a civil forum at Saddleback. And and one of the questions I asked them was this: does evil exist? And if it does, what do you do with it? Do you ignore it? Do you compromise with it? Or do you eliminate it? And they both gave very different answers, and I'm not going to go into that right now, but the bottom line is, there's a difference of opinion on that. And how do you, right now, for instance, Christians are being beheaded by ISIS on a daily basis. Do we go slow on that?
No.
Or do we go fast on that? I'm just asking, how fast do you go when people are suffering?
Cornel and I have joined together. We were out ahead of this, a year ago, before most people had heard about ISIS. I knew a bit about it because of my work on the Commission on Religious Freedom. And I put out a call for decisive action against ISIS early on, military action. I called for the destruction of ISIS as a fighting force. And one of the very first people to join me, without my asking him to do it, was Cornel West. Now, neither of us is saying that we should be reckless in the committing of U.S. military forces to this project and just go in an unthinking way and just bring as much force as we can possibly bring to bear as quickly as we can, because it's not going to work. But doing nothing is also not an option. So what we need to think about is, what is the most effective strategy, knowing that we're not going to be able to end this thing, especially now that we put it off for more than a year and delayed and let ISIS gain more and more territory and more prestige and support in that part of the world. We know we're not going to be able to eliminate it now in a single strike. So we need an intelligent, well thought out plan to get to the ultimate goal of eliminating ISIS as a fighting force.
Okay, let's take some questions from the internet. Let me get out my phone here and we'll get some questions. By the way, hang on here. All right, here's question number 1. How can the oppressed disagree civilly with their oppressor, and why should they?
Well, I would say that the question is, how does the oppressed respond to oppression with integrity, honesty, decency, and courage? So as a Christian, I do hate the deed and still love the doer, but I don't like the doer. Oh, no. No. So that, but it depends on what the context is. If there's a context in which there's a public space where the oppressed can enter without humiliation or being disrespected, then that's wonderful. If the oppressed enters that public space and is still disrespected over and over and over again, then we're moving toward a serious clash and conflict because we begin to exhaust. It's like Mandela in South Africa, right? They explore every possible nonviolent option available. Then in 1957, Mandela says, we're founding the spirit of the nation. And we're going to armed struggle, but it's armed struggle against property. Now, I think that's very interesting. Even in Baltimore, you see, you look at the response of the attack on property versus the attack on human beings. You see it? It's like, oh my God, this is out of control. This is the worst thing that can. Wait a minute, this brother just got shot. This brother just broke his back. Wait a minute, we've got to make sure that the tears of the mothers of the sisters, the daughters and sons who are shot or mistreated by the police have the same status as the tears of the police's wives when the police are killed. So that even the president, see, Brother Obama upset me. He's been upsetting me for a long time. A long time. God bless him.
Don't go there, Cornel.
But I mean, you get the president comes out and call these brothers and sisters thugs and criminals. And I said to myself, well, wait a minute. If you want to talk about criminals, you can start with Wall Street in 2008. How come Holder didn't prosecute one Wall Street executive? If you want to talk about criminals, you could talk about drones and what happened on the killing list. So in that sense, let's be broader in our conceptions. But by using that kind of language, it makes it difficult to stay in contact with the humanity of the folk, even when they're doing the wrong thing. But the violation of property, for me, just doesn't have the same status. I'm with Mandela. Do you agree with this in terms of property versus human?
Oh, there's no
human
question.
life?
Human life matters much more than property.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I also agree. I'm not too happy with Obama myself.
Oh, that's for good reason. For good reason. No, indeed.
You know, I honestly think, and I actually told this to Benjamin Netanyahu, that I believe the model for peace in the Middle East is actually in Rwanda. because somehow they figured out a way to get people who were killing each other 20 years ago.
Interesting.
Every time I go to the West Bank or whatever, I see more fences going up, more walls, more and eye for an eye, and we're killing each other, and it's blindness. When I go to Rwanda, I see this family killed everybody in this family except these two people, and yet they're living next to each other without armed police, without barbed wire. Somehow they figured out how to do reconciliation. Even South Africa, I admire Mandela, but Mandela did not bring reconciliation. He brought peace, and he brought a peaceful transfer of power, but he did not bring reconciliation, because there is not reconciliation in South Africa, not compared to, for instance, Rwanda, where you actually have people who literally were hacking each other up, or one group hacking another group, and they are, I've been in reconciliation rallies there where these two people would give their testimonies to each other. And part of that is I was talking to Kagame one time, and he said, I said, what do you think is the secret? He said, leaders absorb the pain. He said, when the freedom fighters came back in to stop the genocide, and they were vastly outnumbered by the genociders. And he says, you walk into a room and your whole family's been killed, and your mom is laying on the floor, she's dying and she's been raped, and there's the guy who did it, and you've got the gun. What are you going to do? And he said, we made a law, you may not kill them because we believe in the rule of law. And he said, we're going to actually take them through a justice system. And that's why actually Rwanda has the second highest prison population next to America. Now they did outlaw the death penalty and said, if you admit your crime, we will give you time off, and if you show us where the bodies are. But absorbing the pain was a big difference. And I think that's a method. I mean, let's get on to the next question.
No, that's
very hard to do.
That's
question number 2. What's an issue that each of you changed each other's mind on as a result of dialogue together?
Well,
that's an interesting one.
yeah, that's right. Cornel has a very.
Eat tonight.
I'll go first because Cornel has a very long list, and I want him to choose the right one to talk about.
Humility, right?
Humor makes a difference in a friendship, though.
One of the very first things, I don't even know if Cornel will remember talking about this, one of the very first things that we talked about, we were on a college campus, we were meeting in Princeton, Cornel was interviewing me for a magazine. It's a long story.
Brother Andrew.
Brother Andrew, that's right.
Out in LA.
And one of the things we talked about was affirmative action, race-based or ethnic-based preference policies in admissions to universities like Princeton, where we were teaching, or in employment or in government contracting. And I've always been quite critical of those kinds of programs because they strike me as inconsistent with the basic principle of equality. And there's some other problems with them as well. But Cornel asked a set of questions that made me think a lot more deeply about that. And Cornel softened my kind of wholesale general opposition to those sorts of things when he raised some questions about whether we would really want it to be the case if this simply was the way the numbers worked out, that at a university like Princeton University, we didn't have any more than the smallest token representation, 2, 3, 4, 5 black students. Would our campus not be worse off by virtue of the effective absence of people from the African American community? And when you think about that question, the answer is, of course, we would be worse off with that. Now, how we handle that exactly? What do we have quotas? You know, and how do we choose which groups get the benefits and which don't? Pacific Islanders, yes. Sicilians, no. How do we do? There are a lot of problems I still see with that, but I see this as a much more complicated and difficult issue than I did before I engaged with Cornel on the question. And this is something I now wrestle with in a way that I didn't before.
That's a great illustration. Yeah. Great example.
No. Well, I can say just quickly what I was deeply impressed by when I got a chance to know Brother Robbie was ways in which he would always defend our precious conservative evangelicals, not just Christians, but evangelical anything, Muslims or others, in the Princeton context, where a kind of secular sensibilities is predominant.
Sure.
And I'm always deeply impressed by that. I think what has been reinforced in our conversations is the degree to which I have always been very critical of big banks and big corporations that are unaccountable, the 1% who own 42% of the wealth in the country, and I remain very critical. But I think my suspicion of big government has been deeply reinforced by dialogues with Brother Robbie and Hayek and others, especially given its powers of surveillance and the possibilities of FBI and other agencies reinforcing the kind of violation of rights and liberties, and the possible creation of an American fascism when you get big business, big banks controlling politicians, and then big government coming together, keeping track of everybody, and the dissenting voices being
That
not
warning
just pushed
goes back to
aside.
Eisenhower. I said that warning goes all the way back to
That's
Eisenhower.
right. He said it in the speech right before he left the presidency. You're absolutely right.
Who's the biggest beneficiary of big government? It's big business.
Yeah. All right, here's our, we got time? Yeah, we got time for this, good. Here's the question for Cornel. How do we that are living in a painful truth convince our brothers and sisters out of their apathy to our pain?
Examples are the go-kart of judgment. That's what Immanuel Kant says in the Critique of Pure Reason on page 178 of the Norman Kemp Smith translation.
He gives us the page. Did I tell you, genius? What did I say?
Oh, no.
He names the page.
No, that's not genius. That's just reading that text over and over and over and over again.
Yeah, right.
That's all. But what I mean, but the important point here is that all we really have is our attempts to be imitators of a Jesus who we have a relation with that facilitates our courage to love in a world of overwhelming hatred and revenge and domination and exploitation. How do we love our ways through that darkness? You see? And it doesn't make any sense. It seems to be groundless. It's characterized by an objective uncertainty that Kierkegaard talks about. It is the most absurd way of being in the world, and yet it is the most magnificent way, given the joys of serving others and given the relations of a God who in some ways continues to weep, given the condition of the world.
Amen. Amen. Great. All right, here's number 4. Are there intolerable opinions? If so, how should we spot them and respond to them? If not, how do we tolerate evil opinions?
You want to take that?
Sure.
one?
Sure.
Or we can just pass it up and go to number 5.
No. Wait, no. I think Brother Robert, he's got an answer to that.
I think
That was very, very Jesus-like of you to do that. You take that one.
I'm something of an extremist on this. I will confess, an extreme supporter of John Stuart Mill's principles of liberty in chapter 2 of On Liberty. I've been a critic of Mill's general harm principle articulated in chapter 1 of On Liberty. I can't give you the page number. Cornell's got it memorized. But in chapter 2, when he talks about liberty of thought and expression, and my view is that especially in the university context, especially in the context of a university that is non-sectarian, like Princeton University, that doesn't make a faith commitment up front, take a stand, but presents itself as an institution that is welcoming all points of view, providing a forum for the engagement of ideas. So the kind of university in which I spend my days, I think it's very important that we be willing to listen to anybody who's willing to come into the university context and present reasons and arguments. In other words, to do business in the currency of academic discourse, the currency of reasons and arguments, even if I deeply oppose, if I abominate the position being articulated. Professor West and I have a famous colleague, Peter Singer. Peter Singer not only believes in the legitimacy of abortion through the entire 9 months, he believes in infanticide, the killing of infants, the moral permissibility of the killing of infants even after they're born. Now this to me is an outrageous abomination. In a sense, that is an intolerable idea. The idea that any human being, any member of the human family can be directly targeted for killing. You know, that to me is just an intolerable thing. And yet, I would be the first one in line to oppose the eviction of Peter Singer. This scandalizes some of my conservative pro-life friends to oppose evicting Peter Singer from Princeton. Now, there's some people who feel about me, some people feel about Cornell, the way I feel about Peter Singer. Now, and that's because Professor Singer is prepared to make arguments and give reasons for his position. So if he's willing to do that, I am willing to listen, and I am in fact willing to listen with an open mind. Now, none of those arguments has cut any ice with me. I've listened to them respectfully.
But he has the right to persuade you.
It's not just the right to say it. He's got more, in the university context, in the context of truth-seeking, he's got the right more than to say it, as terrible as I think it is. He's got the right to have me listen and thoughtfully consider what he has to say. Our devotion to truth should be so powerful that we are willing to do that, because it is conceivable that even an opinion that strikes us and me and probably strikes many of you as so abominable could be right. And even if it's wrong, which I'm quite confident it is, we have something to learn about the basis of our belief in the sanctity of life from confronting the very best reasons that a very intelligent person can adduce against the sanctity of life position. And Professor Singer leaves us in no doubt that what he is aiming for is the destruction of the basic sanctity of life principle that's part of our Judeo-Christian heritage. So now, does that mean I'm in favor of simply unlimited speech? No, and I don't think anybody really is. What I'm against is abuse, hurling epithets, incivility, a grunt, or a name-calling episode is not making reasons and arguments. It is not the currency of academic discourse to simply verbally assault someone or brutalize someone. But if someone's willing to make arguments and provide reasons and cause us to think, then I think we've got to tolerate it in the rich sense of toleration, not just letting him speak, but listening to him.
But and that comes because, you can clap for that. That comes because you have confidence in the gospel, and that you believe in a free market world, may the best idea win. We got the best idea. It makes sense. That a lot of Christians aren't confident that what they actually believe is the best idea. And so they're reticent to pull back on it, or they want to stifle all competition. I'm not afraid of competition. Bring it on. And that's what this Center for Christian Thought does. Is say, bring it on. Okay, and that's what our apologists at Biola do. Bring it on. Because we're not afraid of these things. You know, probably 10 years ago, I was in China and actually had a state dinner in my honor in People's Hall. And the Politburo was there, and they were honoring me for, I won't go into the whole background on it, but I got into a debate with the members of the cabinet of the Communist Party in China. In fact, I was actually sitting next to the director of religious affairs, who's the guy in charge of persecution.
Wow.
Okay, and as I began to talk to him, and I said, see, the problem with you guys is you want the economic success of the West without the ethical and moral and theological underpinnings. I said, you want freedom of markets, but you don't want freedom of speech, you don't want freedom of information, you don't want freedom of religion, you don't want all these other freedoms. If you impose capitalism on a society that you don't have a Judeo-Christian ethic, what do you get? You get Russia. You change communists for oligarchs, and you just get another set of thugs controlling which is exactly what happens. Is a few guys have all the wealth in China. You've got to have that moral, ethical basis. That's why we go back to this cut flower syndrome. If you cut off the roots, is America a Christian nation today? I would say no. Was it founded on Christian principles? Undoubtedly. Undoubtedly. Because we have two sets of founders, not just the political founders. We had the Pilgrim founders, and they came here for religious liberty. And that's why the first freedom, and you know, Robbie and I have been on panels on this before. The first freedom is freedom of religion. That's why we call it America's first freedom. It is the first paragraph, first phrase of the first sentence of the first paragraph of the First Amendment. Freedom of religion comes before freedom of the press. It comes before freedom of speech. It comes before the right to assemble. It comes before the right to bear arms. Because if I don't have the freedom to believe, and that's what you're giving Peter Singer, you're giving him the freedom to believe what he wants to believe. And I support that. Because if I don't have the freedom to believe what I want to believe, what I feel is true, then I don't need the freedom of speech. I don't need freedom of the press. I don't need freedom of assembly because I don't have the freedom of conscience.
But I think the problem is that, see, it's one thing to say, as I would say, that I would fight for the right of Brother Rush Limbaugh to be wrong. Because I have a libertarian sensibility in my own Christian witness.
Yeah.
But it's another thing when you look at the structures. You see, if you have a corporate media that is able to transmit all kinds of lies about people with very little accountability because they have big money. So they could, let's say MSNBC could lie about Brother Robbie. Big money. How's he going to account? How's he going to render them accountable? You know what I mean? Or Fox News can lie about different folk, and all of them involved in lies. I mean, MSNBC is neoliberal propaganda. Milquetoast, spineless Democrats. See what I mean? And much of Fox is propaganda for Republicans.
Opportunity offender. I like that. You know?
No, I mean, Fox News, you get, you know, a lot of mean-spirited Republicans. Doesn't mean all Republicans are mean-spirited, but that's the propaganda machine to make big money. Right back to the money-making again. At that point, you say to yourself, well, yes, we have to be libertarian. Yes, we will defend unpopular voices and so on. But the structure is one in which if the money interests are going to shape the very framework in which we engage in our discussion, then what happens to the culture? It becomes more debased. It becomes more and more dumbed down, and it just becomes a matter of...
I have a hard time arguing against that because we saw it recently, from my point of view, in Indiana. The Indiana Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which was a perfectly good, valid bill that was guilty of none of the crimes of which it was accused, was smeared by the media almost universally and by big business and the corporate structure. The entire elite establishment came down on that law, depicting it in an entirely false light. Most Americans were led to believe that the law was a monstrous license for discrimination when it was absolutely nothing of the kind. And yet, the forces that knew that these were spectacular lies being told lacked the resources to actually get their message across. Now, we're in a little better shape, I think, than we were prior to the creation of the internet, because there are ways to communicate with people going around NBC, CBS, ABC, PBS, MSNBC, Fox, New York Times, LA Times, Chicago Tribune, Wall Street Journal, and so forth. So there's something there, but the problem that Cornel puts his finger on really is a problem. You know, when there is a monopoly viewpoint, when there is an established cultural orthodoxy, and the major media of communication are with the program and not letting alternative arguments be heard and alternative voices be heard, we're in big trouble. We can congratulate ourselves, pat ourselves on the backs for being a culture that recognizes free speech, but only one side's being able to communicate.
Absolutely.
Okay, last question, because we're running out of time, but this bring it on home here. Should universities be a safe place? You know, we've heard about...
that's the last thing.
These things about we're going to protect your feelings and political correctness and all of that.
Brother Cornel was preaching about this on the plane on the way over here. You cut loose, brother.
No, that when students decide to go to university, they're coming to learn how to die. They're coming for critical scrutiny. They're coming for critical self-examination. And anytime you let a certain assumption go, that's a form of death. And there's no development or maturation or growth without that death taking place. So when you graduate from Biola and you get that diploma, that beautiful smile and the sparkle in your eyes, and your mom and dad is sacrificing inexplicably for you to graduate. And if you're the same person you were when you were a freshman, you wasted their money. If you didn't learn how to die, you wasted their money. It's a critical process. So the last thing you need is a safe place. What you want to be unsettled in such a way that you have access to a great set of traditions of earlier voices in the past who themselves were unsettled but had the courage to pursue a quest for truth and for knowledge, small k, small t, and thereby allow you to become a more mature, a more loving, a more compassionate person, even as in the end you will fail. Samuel Beckett is right. Try again, fail better. Try again, fail better. And they put your body in the coffin and they're going to say, what a majestic failure he was. Oh, he was not, but he still fell on his face. Thank God we got a God that loves us that can still embrace
Rick, all I can tell you is if you're a student and you're looking for a safe space, don't come to the classroom where Cornel and I teach, because that is not a safe space. Whatever your views are, I don't care if they're Christian, if they're secularist, if they're Muslim, if they're Jewish, if they're Marxist, whatever you view, that is going to be challenged. It's going to be challenged with the very best arguments that can be mustered against it. If you look at, I'm teaching this semester, in addition to my seminar with Cornell, a civil liberties course. My civil liberties course covers all the hot button issues: affirmative action, religion in public life, abortion, marriage, death penalty, targeted killing. You're not supposed to say assassination, all right? Targeted killing, all of these issues. Now, if you look at my syllabus, you will find that no matter where you are on any of those issues, you're going to find powerful arguments in those readings against your position. They're going to trouble you. They are going to disturb you. They are going to make you worry about your view. I think as teachers, that's our job. It's not to make you feel comfortable and reinforce you. It's to
feel good.
Or to feel good. It's certainly not to make you feel good. It's to make you feel kind of pulled apart, in tension, wondering what's up here. Maybe I'm not thinking the right thing. That really is our job. We want kind of the development of critical intelligence. Not because there is no truth. You know that all three of the fellows sitting up here in front of you are people who are strong believers in truth and strong opponents of the idea of moral relativism. It's not because there is no truth. It's precisely because if we're going to get to the truth of the matter, we must, on any given issue, understand and appreciate the most compelling arguments to be made on both or all sides of the question. If we're not doing that, we're not thinkers. We are ideologues. We are dogmatists. We are not thinkers. And even as Christians, it's important for us to understand that our faith is a thinking faith.
That's right.
Our faith is a thinking faith. So our critical intelligence is in play in the very activity of living the Christian life.
Wow. Cornel just keeps coming back to death, and you keep coming back about what it means to live, and those in tension together it is life through death, which is the resurrection. That is what we are.
That's the cross. That's the cross.
Years ago, the famous Catholic Bishop Fulton Sheen went to a leprosy colony, and he was visiting lepers in the colony, and he went over to talk to one young guy who was sitting on the ground and just a loincloth around him. He not only had leprosy, but he had evidently several other skin diseases because he had open sores on his body that were oozing and pussy. And he said he leaned over to talk to this guy, and he was wearing a cross, and the chain broke. And he said the cross fell into this open sore on the man's eye, the ooze and the pus. And he said, at first I was revolted, and he said, I stepped back and it just kind of made me sick to my stomach. And then he said, all of a sudden, I was overwhelmed with compassion. And I reached into the sore and I took up the cross. I heard that story when I was a university student. And when I heard it, I thought, that is the finest definition I've ever heard of what it means to follow Christ. To go out into the stores of life where people are bleeding and hurting and don't know the truth and are dying in the streets and take up the cross. And if we don't do that, I doubt our Christianity. Let's thank these guys for a great evening. Thank you, guys. Thank you, guys. Love you. That was great. Love you guys.
That was beautiful.
Thank you.
That was beautiful. Yeah. God. Yeah.
Great job, guys.
God bless.
Great job.
Biola. God bless Biola University.
That ball's still soaring.
Biola University offers a variety of biblically centered degree programs, ranging from business to ministry to the arts and sciences. Visit biola.edu to find out how Biola could make a difference in your life.